welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Well, guys, I want to tell you a little story tonight related to what's going on with the Democratic Party convention this weekend. I think it kicked off today. And just kind of where we're at in our society, culture in America today, really the sad state. You know, it's interesting because, the Olympics just got wrapped up out in Paris, last week or something like that. And excuse my French, but it was a complete shit show out there. And while I didn't really watch any of it, I just saw some highlights that went around social media. It felt as if Satan was mocking us out in the open now at this point. And really, again, I think France really highlights exactly everything that's gone wrong, obviously, since the French Revolution and how crazy France has become. And with that, really, the rest of the West has kind of followed along. And with America now being a total state of turmoil, we're really not that far behind right now. And with the Democratic Party convention kicking off tonight, and from what I'm hearing, again, I don't watch any of the stuff, only rumors that I hear through social media outlets, things of that nature, highlights of the things. Apparently they're offering free vasectomies, right? I mean, can it get any really more morally degenerate than that? I mean, let's be honest here. I mean, we're offering here sacramentals or sacraments to Satan himself. It's quite amazing. And as we watch America really deteriorate right before our very eyes, I got a conversation with a friend of mine tonight as this kind of was going on in the background. And, I expressed to him my frustration with the political process, especially, as far as for me following any of this left and right paradigm thing that we do in America. I just tap out of it and live my life. I study history and I try to follow politics as much as I can without it really allowing me to get absolutely frustrated beyond belief as we see the West collapse. And so I asked my friend of mine, tell me what we have left in the Republican Party. Tell me. As a Catholic, what do I get from the Republican Party? We gave up on the pro-life issue this time around. We gave up on the disordered marriage issue last time around. What's there left at this point? And the response, of course, was, well, yeah, I mean, the Republican Party is changing to an ever, shifting, demographic in America. America has changed. Therefore, we just gotta go with the flow here with the party that's at least got somewhat of some sanity left, at least when you compare it to the far left in the Democratic Party. And, it's interesting because this is what it's always been with the Republican Party, the sort of the big tent approach, create a massive, wide, diluted sort of coalition in order to get the Republicans over the finish line. I understand that. And for me, there's nothing more frustrating because that's just something that's not acceptable to me, especially now as we're a nation that doesn't even subscribe to any forms of natural law. I'm not sure we ever really did, to be honest with you, but I mean, there was a Protestant element at one time that was a little bit more orthodox, maybe decades ago. And I get how far left we've come now, but I guess that it feeds my integralist notions and really confirms everything that I've said since I kind of declared myself to be an integralist a little over a decade ago, and how this is untenable and how conservatives are surrendering to the far left. It's interesting because the right in America still says to themselves that there is a difference between liberalism and communism, right? Or classical liberalism and what we see in the Democratic Party today, right? Where in the classical liberal mindset, we still champion those values of America, from the origins of the founding of free speech and free thought and free ideas and, rights to assembly, while the left has shut all these ideas down. And granted, there's some truth to that, without a doubt. But it's like I've always said to my friends on the right, and this is where I get frustrated. It is the classical liberal notion of ultimate pluralism, however, that opens the door to communism. And the moment ultimate pluralism comes in, and you can't root out your civilization out of the moral rot, the philosophical rot, the political rot, the cultural rot, is the moment that you've surrendered to communism. Because that's always been the point here since the French Revolution, is to get the West to surrender its Christian origins, its Christian roots. And it does start with classical liberals that effectively abandoned Christendom for these liberal ideas at the time of the French Revolution, in some respects, the American Revolution. And so this is my great struggle. And so if the idea is, okay, let's all just bring these ideas together. Let the factions fight it out, as I believe Madison argued in the Federalist Papers. And after all these factions battle and they fight one another, then the top factions will always rise to the top, and the bottom factions will kind of fade away. And okay, sort of survival of the fittest of ideologies. And of course, the first question you ask yourself, okay, you can have factions rise, you can have factions fall, but what happens if the wrong factions rise? Especially in a society that has abandoned the sacramental nature of the faith and now has no way to deal with its fallen nature, right? Because this is what kept mankind's passion and control to a certain degree when the church was in place, that we had a sacramental understanding of the Christian faith, right? We delude Christianity at the Enlightenment and really in America, because America was founded as a bastion of splintered or warring Protestant sects, and we have to concoct sort of an ideal so these Protestant sects can somewhat get along with one another. Again, just like we see the big tent approach in the Republican Party today that dilutes values, we saw this at the very beginning of the founding of the nation, as we concocted this idea that, well, you can believe pretty much whatever it is you want to believe, right? I mean, this regardless of the proclamations that we had state churches at different levels, or the different colonies, things of that nature, it still led to the proliferation of many faiths. Or the American political class interpreted the First Amendment in its clause of religious liberty, right? And when you get a polarity of religions that all contradict with one another, then you have a problem formulating proper and just culture. And when you can't formulate proper and just culture, it leads to chaos at the political level. And this is what we've seen. I mean, you can sit here and tell me that we have to vote for the Republican Party today because America has changed. And I think that's a very simple way of looking at it. And I agree with it to a certain respect. But in reality, America has changed because the culture has collapsed and the family has been destroyed. And there's been a myriad of ways where it has been attacked. But one of the foundational, fundamental ways that it has been allowed to be destroyed over the past 50, 60, 70 years, at least since the end of World War II, has been by allowing nefarious ideas to come into society and proclaiming that all ideas have an equal voice, an equal space, a right to be discussed, or whatever you may have it, right? Communism, to a certain degree, was allowed to come in. Granted, slowly. I mean, there's many Americans that understood the fundamental nature, the destructive evil of communism, right? This is why George Patton opposed it after World War II, right? And became a thorn in the side of the American administration. Joseph McCarthy, to a certain extent, understood the nature of evil and tried to fight it in the States until his character was assassinated. But notice on the right, where we've given equal platform to everything, including communism, right? One of the more notorious characters, as I like to say, Glenn Beck, said about a year ago, I was listening to his program here, basically said that even communists deserve a chair at the table of power, right? All we got to do is express our American ideals of freedom and liberty, and we'll win at the end of the day. But there's no reason to oust communists, right? Because everybody has an equal say-so within the realm of our society. Freedom and liberty dictates that, according to Glenn Beck, right? And of course, the problem you have is you're dealing with an ideology that doesn't play on equal footing, doesn't play by the same rules. Communism is an ideology that's very deceptive. It's subtle in our time. Obviously, at the period of history where the Bolsheviks governed Eastern Europe, it was much more brute. It was much more overt in forcing its ideas down sort of the people's throats, in that case, becoming very violent and deadly. But in the West, they've had to do it more covertly, right? More subtly, right? And this is where we get into the areas of communists who are atheists. They reject the moral principles of Christianity, which are the foundations of the West. And how do you deal with people, again, that can lie, cheat, steal, murder, steal elections, what have you, right? Every moral vice that has ever been condemned by our wonderful Christian traditions in the West, communists always upend those. They don't care to use those. And the moment your society is infiltrated by communists, then what? See, this is why every time you hear conservatives say, we need to fight and win in the battle arena of ideas. No. You need to fight and win and protect and defend your ideas for what you believe. Many conservatives will tell you that America was founded as a Christian nation. Well, I have some differences of opinion with that. I can say to my Christian friends, fine, let's go with that, right? I may disagree at the founding, what happened there. I think it was much more convoluted. I think it was a mixture of ideologies that were there at the founding of the nation. But at the very least, maybe culturally, I think I could see that as a Protestant nation at origin. Fine, fair enough. I don't know, though, if I would go as far as to say that it was a confessional Christian nation like some conservatives have tried to proclaim. But that's for another time. But it has been this idea of pluralism. What happens once communists get into your society and then embed themselves in the Constitution? How do you stop them? How do you stop them? Well, you can't. This is why conservatives are absolutely out of ideas. And while they're defending their own principles, their own ideological view of how governance should take place, they don't know how to govern. Because first they allow communists to get in. They don't know how to root it out because there's always a contradiction between the idea of freedom and liberty and true justice, and how do we handle and maintain our culture, and how do we govern a culture. And then once the society has been infiltrated, everybody throws their hands up and says, well, I don't know. This isn't the America I know. I don't know what happened to America. But what happened to America, you stood on the sidelines as communists infiltrated America. That's what's happened. This is the great peril that we're suffering from. This is why I keep saying, right? As the Republicans and the conservatives tell me, well, Frank, America has shifted, and the Republican Party has kind of has to go with it because just where we're at, and a lot of them will tell you, well, we just got to wait now for a religious revival, and this thing will turn around one day. And I always find that conversation interesting, considering I don't know of a religious revival that's actually ever restored liberalism, because liberalism is an anathema to Christianity. Liberalism and Christianity don't go hand in hand. A lot of people like to bring up, for example, the Great Awakenings that happened in the 19th century in America. Those were moments of religious revivals, we're told. Okay, fine. But were they religious revivals? Or was it simply the offshoots of Protestantism mixed in with an open-ended concept of religious freedom simply working itself out. Christianity being thrown into the marketplace within the realm of a capitalist society, finding its roots, finding its niches, and individuals exploiting religion in order to find their niches, right? It's like I've said so many times to you before. Go to any major European city. What do you see at the center of the city, in the middle of the piazza? Is it City Hall? No. Are there banks? No. Are there municipal buildings? No. It's the church. It's the great cathedrals of Christendom. That's what still sits there, right? You may say, well, Frank, they're all museums now. Fine, fine. But I'm talking here about the dictates of history, right? In Europe, religion, the Catholic faith, was not a tool to be played with, as we saw later on in America. Because in America, we threw religion into the private sector, right? This is why we see these sort of dry and bland societies, sterile societies, lack beauty, lack inspiration, lack hope in many ways, because we are a society based upon sort of this, sort of material dialectic, if you want to call it that, and everything is an emphasis of the material world, with that old world focused on things that were far and above just this world alone. They focused on the life to come of the world after. And there was a distinct veil between the Catholic Church in Europe and ultimately what happened at the governmental level, at the cultural level. But in America, what happens? Strip mall Christianity. And we see this really early on in the 19th century, only one or two generations after the enshrinement of the Constitution of the United States, as we have the Mormons start popping up, and the Scientology and the campfire preachers and all the various factions now that begin to splinter and pop up, because guess what? There's now incentive in religion to be used in a way that's profitable. And why not, right? You rent your strip mall little space out there, you put a podium up there, and you start preaching your message based upon your own personal interpretation. As long as you get butts in the seats, right? There's an economic transaction there that takes place, right? And so that's why religion in America is not at the center of civilization of the major cities. It's in the private sector, where every individual can use religion for his own purposes, whether it's for profit or whether it's to find a sense of security, whether that security is true or false. Whatever it may be, religion has always been a tool in America for every individual to tinker with. And we've seen some of the greatest abuses the world has ever seen. Granted, some of these problems existed in the old world too, don't get me wrong, but not to the level that we've seen in America. As many theologians have pointed out, that American Christianity is one of the strangest phenomena the world has ever seen, because of all the splintering and all the effects of splintering of the really kooky, odd sort of sects that have risen. And so to make a long story short, when I'm told at the end of the day that, well, listen, America's changed, that's how the Republican Party has to change, we have to wait for some, epic moment where the winds of change are going to restore order to the universe. Well, that doesn't really do me any good. It doesn't mean anything to me at the end of the day. I'm just watching a nation fall hard at the end of the day. And I think we all feel it at this point. Again, what do I get from the Republican Party? They don't have the pro-life issue on the platform anymore. They're not fighting disordered marriage anymore. What are they fighting on a cultural front with Donald Trump? What are they fighting? What cultural issues do they stand for anymore? They don't. They don't. It's a populist movement basically focused on economics and fixing the economy. That's what it is. And while I would say that economic issues are important, right? Especially for families, I will say that. There's more to it than this, right? We've ultimately have had a total surrender. I mean, obviously, the Republican Party being co-opted by the neocons 2 decades ago now ultimately leads to a revolution or a massive shift in political ideology within the Republican Party, it gives us a populace. Because in many ways, you could argue that Donald Trump is an old-time Democrat that is now the head of the Republican Party. This is how far the Republican Party has fallen. And so for me, if now we've become a nation that really not only doesn't acknowledge natural law, but we're running away from natural law at this point in time, what is the point? What is the point anymore? Why should I go out there and vote now? When, as a Catholic, I get nothing from the Republican Party anymore. Nothing, right? You want to tell me, okay, maybe there's less wars, but I don't even know if I can claim that. I mean, J.D. Vance's proclamation to take the country to war, an all-out war against Iran, that didn't give me any a sense of security that we're going to avoid more wars. The posturing in Israel, that's another issue that I'm not a big fan of. So I'm not even sure we're going to get less wars with Donald Trump at this point. And listen, I'll give credit where credit is due. I think his first term, he avoided war as much as he could, and I think he did a good job, and I'll give some credit there. But still, here we are. I'm 52 years old, going on 53, and I've seen everything in my lifetime just be destroyed. Everything I love, everything I cherish, everything I hold sacred has been wiped out. And now I'm being told that I need to support the political party that surrendered on the very things that I believe in the most, the very thing that made me a Republican in the first place. As I said before, it was the pro-life issue that made me a young Republican some 30 years ago. Tell me why I stick with the Republican Party at this point. What am I getting from them? I don't know. And listen, that's not to say that the far left isn't demonically kooky. I see it. Don't get me wrong. But here I am as a citizen of this country. I've watched everything be wiped out. Everything. The faith, the culture, the economy, the middle class is not making anymore. We're at wars all over this world right now. And I'm supposed to do what with that? Both the lesser of two evils? I'm sorry. I'm just not excited to get my butt off the couch and pull a lever for either of the parties that don't represent me anymore. These false choices that we've been given. Now, at the end of the day, will I get up and pull the lever? Sure, I'll pull the lever. Fine, I'll pull the damn lever. But tell me what happens with 4 years of Trump. Tell me what, even if he wins, I have questions whether he can win. To be honest with you, I'm not a big believer in many of the issues with, okay, never mind, I'm not getting into that because I can't say it on this platform, right? But tell me what I get with Trump as a pro-life Catholic, as a guy that believes in restoring the natural law, as a guy that believes first and foremost the moral principles, the moral law is foundational and should precede economics, should precede the ideas of foreign policy. Because if the moral law isn't properly picked up on or properly applied to America, everything else falls apart. And this is the Faustian bargain we've all been sort of asked to make with the Republican Party, right? Let's bring everybody in. Come on, we got to get across the finish line because the far left has a good portion of the electorate already in their hip pocket, right? So it becomes an ideological movement for the right primarily, and we have to pick off 2% of the vote here, 5% there, 10% there, in order to get us over the finish line. And that bigger that tent gets, the more watered down the principles become within the Republican Party, to the point where what does it stand for anymore? What does it stand for? Close the border and tax cuts? Is that all we are? No principles of natural law, no principles of the moral law, right? We have a culture that has gone absolutely batshit crazy all around us. The moral depravity everywhere. Broken souls, broken individuals, broken families. And we're not supposed to care about that. Let's just get our tax cuts. And listen, I'm not in the upper bracket. So I probably won't even get a tax cut, to be honest with you. Or if it is, it's minimal, right? It's like when George W. Bush back in 2000 passed a tax cut. And, obviously the argument from the right is, well, of course, the upper classes and the wealthy are getting a bigger tax cut because they pay almost all of the taxes. And for us guys sort of at the middle class level and below, it's like, well, yeah. And this is what George W. Bush was saying in the campaign some 25 years ago, let's call it now. Well, for a family, you get a $500 child tax credit, you can buy a set of tires or something like that, right? Okay, thanks, Mr. President. Thanks, right? Because that's all we got out of the George W. Bush administration. Think about it. Think about what we got out of the George W. Bush administration, which was a Republican administration. We got a tax cut. I got $500 back on a child tax credit, so I could buy a set of tires. Thanks, Mr. President. What else did we get? Did we get any of the fundamental issues that's destroying the family straightened out under that administration? No, not really. Not really. And even then, did we get a tax cut? Because everywhere I turn, on every transaction I make, I'm double and triple taxed. Pretty crazy, to be honest with you, how much we're taxed in this country from birth to death at every turn. Sales tax, property tax, utility tax, gas tax, death tax, this tax, that tax. And after you pay that tax, and there's another tax on top of that tax on the money you've already been taxed upon, and tax upon tax upon tax. I mean, think about it. Think about it. Virtually every transaction we make in this country is taxed after it's already been taxed out of our paychecks to begin with. It's insane. It's insane what we pay tax. You think the Republican Party is going to solve that problem? No, they're going to give us a marginal tax cut rate and everything else stays at the end of the day. And then they'll just take the money from other areas of the economy or everyday life of how we live because they're taxing on top of money that's already taxed. So they may give us an overall lower tax rate. It's okay, but every other transaction that takes place, they're going to get their money here, there, and everywhere, right? It's crazy how much we're taxed. It makes the idea of land of the free, home of the brave look absolutely foolish. And you have to ask to yourself, where did this all go wrong? How did it all go wrong? Well, it went wrong when we became pluralistic. When we started to say that all ideas have an equal weight, because conservatives cannot square away sort of the contradiction between freedom and doing what is right. They've never been able to square that away, right? They'll give you some half-ass sort of political concoction of, well, subsidiarity and limited government. We handle this at the local level, but not this at the state level. And listen, there's some things that are simply universally wrong. Period. The end. Okay. And honestly, I don't want to hear about the 14th Amendment. Okay, unless you can fix it for me, it doesn't mean nothing to me at this point. It's something happened 150 years ago, and if you're going to pull that out now out of your ass in order to prove how subsidiarity is the greatest thing in the history of the world, well, it does nothing for me if you can't fix the problem. If there was some type of a poison pill, some kind of a self-destruction button in the Constitution, well, damn it, how do we fix it? Oh, we can't fix it. Then what's the point of all of this? At this point in history, then, if we can't fix anything anymore because of these political parameters that tie us up, that keep us under lock and chain. None of this makes sense anymore. And so I guess we're all going to the polls in November to vote for the party that isn't the Communist Party, even though they've gravitated further and further to the left. A party that doesn't stand for anything real anymore, other than, okay, we're not as bad as the commies on the left. So I've had it, to be honest with you guys. I've been talking about the inherent corruption of the system more than ever before. I don't think Americans are going to continue to see this. I know many conservatives are starting to wake up, right? I know many people are starting to see, okay, there's fundamental problems here with this system that we have right now, right? Economically, culturally, socially, and politically. Right? We're all beginning to see the traps of this system, this democratic system that we have, this Republican system that we have, this liberal system that we have, right? And when you tell people we can't do anything about these major issues that ill affect society and cultures and families and the nation because of the political parameters of the political structures, it sounds stupid. It makes no sense to people when we can't fix the problems anymore because of political structures. And the political right does this all the time. They tell us, well, okay, because of constitutional restrictions, if we got the power and we use the power of government in order to take away the bad freedoms, then guess what? When the bad guys are in power, they'll take away our good freedoms. But the natural law exists. You see what I'm saying? The natural law, the moral law is not a toy to be played with based upon election results. You do things because they're right, and you do things because they're wrong, and you react to those things, right? Abortion is a crime against the natural law. It is a crime against God, and it shouldn't come down to, ultimately, at the end of the day, to electoral outcomes. You ban abortion because it's evil and it goes against the natural law. It's settled. It's over. The end. If you got a system that comes around later on and says, you know what, we're going to make abortion legal, then your system is evil. Your system is purely evil and it's broken. Do you see the contradiction on the political right here? And there's guys like Beck and Hannity, and for years, Limbaugh, Levin, all these guys make the same error over and over and over, right? They support a system that at the end of the day aids and abets the communist takeover of the nation. And they're stuck. They're chained together by their own contradictory philosophical principles that doesn't allow any correction of the problems. Because they're always arguing philosophy, because the right has never learned how to govern. Because at times, when you govern, you have to make hard decisions and you have to take hard actions. The Europeans understood this. They understood what was happening in the 20s, the 30s, and the 40s as Bolsheviks were invading Western European nations, right? Did they handle it perfectly? Of course not. Nobody does when you're being invaded. But they understood something was wrong, and you can't sit by and philosophize your way out of this thing. And they stood up to it. But here in America, it's like I said, we have communists all over the place that infiltrated every institution. And the conservatives who are telling me to go vote for the Republican Party that is now soulless, has no answers on how to solve any of this other than, okay, Trump will be a 4-year reprieve. He's not as bad as the far lefties, even though they all acknowledge, yeah, he really is an old-time Democrat. Go figure. Go figure. Look how far the Republican Party has fallen. I'm not telling anybody not to vote. I'm not telling anybody not to vote for the Republican Party. I'm not telling anybody anything anymore. I don't prostitute myself for any election. That's something I stopped doing a long time ago. I just lay out the facts here as I see them. I do my best as a fallen human being. My judgment is not always perfect. I have my own personal struggles. I have my own sins, right? I'm trying to figure out the last years of my life, how to live it, right? What is proper law and order? What is proper justice? What is proper in God's eyes? I'm trying to raise a family in the midst of this chaos, trying to guide my own children in the world that's gone batshit crazy under the dictates of democratic liberalism, the very thing conservatives have been preaching, the thing that's fallen apart on their watch. I'm done. I'm done with it, guys. There's so many errors with this system that I just want to check out and just go away. But of course, I don't know where you can really run to anymore because they've monopolized the whole damn thing, the communists have. So anyways, that's it. Just a little rant tonight. I'm frustrated. watching all the grave moral depravity come out of this DNC convention. It's got to be horrid over there, man. I can't. It's Satan is parading in front of the world. Satan is parading, right? And nobody sees it because everybody's lost the faith. Only those of us that have the eyes and ears guided by God even sees this anymore, man. Right? Hollywood parades Satan every day, and a lot of people don't even see it. This is how far the West has fallen under the dictates of post-Enlightenment liberalism. And yet we have a bunch of conservatives that still tell us, well, founding father of America and the Enlightenment, this is the greatest. Enough. The West has fallen because you betrayed Christendom. You betrayed the church. You betrayed Christ. The West has fallen with conservatives and classical liberals in power, advising, promoting, pushing, right, this grand classical liberal ideology. I'm being lectured to by the losers of history. And that's what classical liberals and conservatives are. They are the losers of history. I want to thank you for joining me tonight. This is the pissed off version, frankly speaking. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later. Good night.